Hello everyone and a very warm welcome to this Nordregio webinar. Today we will launch the new Nordic urban rural typology and also a new report presenting analysis using this typology. It's a pleasure to have so many of you joining us today as we delve into the world of territorial differences, settlement and population development patterns in the Nordic region. My name is Sofia Strömgård and I am hosting this webinar today. I'm a communications advisor here at Nordregio, which is an international research center for regional development and spatial planning established by the Nordic Council of Ministers. The webinar today and the report are outcomes of a project called Remote Work, Effects on Nordic People, Places and Planning 2021-2024. This is a collaborative project between our three thematic groups on urban, rural and regional development under the Nordic Cooperation Programme for Regional Development and Planning. Today's topic is the new Nordic urban rural typology. And why is that needed? We already have several other existing typologies for classifying if a municipality is urban, rural or intermediate. However, compared to many European municipalities, we in the Nordics are a bit special. Our municipalities are usually pretty big in size and they cover different types of areas, both urban and rural. With this new typology, we wanted to shed light on different types of urban and rural areas and provide new insights on settlement patterns and demographic changes at a very local scale. Today, we will first hear about how this typology was created and the technical aspects of it by Jouko Järnefelt, who is senior analyst at Ubigu, a Finnish company who led the technical development of this typology. Then we will have a presentation by Nordregio's senior research fellow Mats Stjernberg, who will tell us more about our new report and also how you can use this typology. After every presentation, we will have time for questions. So please use the chat function to ask anything you wonder about. Our GIS analyst Anna Vasilevskaya is also with us today. She's moderating the chat and she's also one of the authors of the new report. So make sure to use the chat. We will also use a poll function during this webinar. So you will also get some short questions popping up on your screen. So make sure to answer them so we can get some information about what you think about the new typology. But let's kick things off and dive into the new Nordic urban rural typology. What exactly were we aiming for and how did we go about both analytically and operationally when constructing this typology? There were many things to consider, and the starting point for the Nordic typology was the Finnish typology that is constructed at grid level instead of being based on administrative units. Now we will hear more from Jouko Järnefelt from Ubigu, who will walk us through the construction of the typology. Jouko, welcome. The screen is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for having me in the seminar. My name is Jouko Järnefelt and I come from Ubigu Ltd, which is a geospatial expert group of people from Finland. I'm located in Tampere and we operate in the Nordic countries. And it was my pleasure to be part of this project. I will be now starting to share my screen. So it should be
yes, we
showing
can
the screen at the moment.
We can see your screen now.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's get started then. I will be talking about the technical aspects or the backgrounds and how did we do the work to construct or generate the urban-rural typology for the Nordic countries. In this opening slide, you already can see the output result from what we achieved. So the typology is using 1 kilometer per 1 kilometer grid data to categorize territories in Nordic countries by urban and rural characteristics. And it identifies 7 types of areas ranging from densely populated areas, or urban centers to sparsely populated rural areas. And the job was done in cooperation with Nordregio's team, Ubigu, and the Finnish Environment Institute experts Ville Helmin and Kimmo Nurmio, who were also participating into setting up the typology in Finland. So the inspiration for our work was the Finnish classification. And here you can see the output from that model. It was the first version of the rural-urban classification was, if I remember correctly, it was done in 2012, and then it was refined in 2016 based on some findings from the version 1. The idea was basically to divide urban and rural areas to more specific areas based on the human interactions between the different areas, and in a very detailed level of geospatial information. So the structure of the cities and the urban areas was more coherent and based on the analytics from the GIS data, not from the statistical data in the administrative boundaries. So in the final output, the picture on the left side, you can see the level of classification of regional classes split into the 7 groups. So the groups are the inner urban areas, which are the most densely populated areas, then surrounded by the outer urban areas and peri-urban areas. And then the rural areas are divided into four group classes. Those are the local centers in the rural areas, rural area close to urban, rural heartland areas, and the sparsely populated rural areas. Basically, what we did was, well, actually, it's, let's change the slide before. So the goal for our job was to basically generate a harmonized version of these 7 classes urban-rural classification of the Nordic countries, respective to the original typology in Finland. So we basically tried to adapt all the methodologies and the data from the Finnish side, but then kind of like hitting our heads on the wall when understanding that not as accurate data is available from all of the countries from the Nordics. And then we basically decided to adapt our own methodologies based on, for example, AI classifiers that was doing part of the job. And then we also scaled up the typology from the 250 meters grid level to the 1 kilometer grid level because of the data sets that were available. And it's also basically a good idea to do this scaling up from to 1 kilometer grid because of the amount of the data, but it could be basically achieved also in the more specific level on the 250 kilometer grid level if needed at some point in the future. But then we, of course, need the data to be that accurate that that could be achieved. But anyway, then the goal changed or was kind of like evolving from this. So we basically based the generating the typology on open and freely accessible GIS data. And the goal was then to understand how well the Finnish urban-rural typology fits within the Nordic context, and then also to be able to make our model to be reusable in the future. Here is represented the data sets that were used in our model. So it varies a little bit in between the countries which data sets were used. So the most accurate data we were able to access was basically from Finland, and then it was varying a little bit if the most accurate data from after Finland was accessible from Sweden or Denmark. In Norway, basically all the data was already aggregated into 1 kilometer grid data, but no kind of like registry data accuracy was not available from the Norway. And from the Iceland, basically the situation was a little bit kind of like even worse, if I may say so. But for example, for Iceland, we were it was mandatory to be using the OpenStreetMap building data to be able to generate the urban structure of Iceland. And then the Korean land cover data was used for all of the respective countries here, and also we were using the Grasshopper API for routing and isochrone creations. Just a short note on the land use data, that if the next iteration will be coming at some point, the Korean dataset could probably be replaced by the ESA land cover dataset in the future. That is just to notice that possibility. Here is the process guide about what we have done. So the pre-analysis step was basically something that was not done in the urban-rural typology by Syke at that point. It was its own kind of like separate analysis done by other group in the Finnish Environment Institute. But anyway, we had to include those pre-analysis steps also in our work, because those were kind of like mandatory pre-steps to be taken before we could continue the urban-rural classification. The red circled areas are basically the most important steps during the generating the urban-rural classification, and I will go through those steps now a little bit closer. So everything is basically the stepping stone for generating this urban-rural typology is basically based on the delineation of urban settlements. There's the translation for in other languages to be clear enough what are these urban settlements. The national definitions for urban settlements may vary slightly, but generally they require at least a minimum population of 200 inhabitants and a maximum building separation of 15 to 200 meters. Finland is a little bit different to other countries because the definition nowadays in Finland is defined in a 250 meters grid, but the basic logic behind generating these areas in Finland is the same as in other countries. On the right-hand side, you can see the comparison of official national definitions and scaled and harmonized definition of urban settlements from our work. The pink or the purple areas are the official national definitions, and the blue areas are the rescaled harmonized definitions in 1 kilometer grid. So if you take a look into Vaasa, Finland, which is the area, the picture on the left, you can see that these areas are aligning together. But the challenge was basically that because in Finland, the urban structure or the kind of like the distance between the buildings in Finland is a little bit higher. In general, it's higher than in other countries. So buildings are a little bit further away from each other in Finland than in the other countries. So we had a first struggle on how to align and iterate this new harmonized definition in 1 kilometer to fit enough well for the Nordic countries. And the biggest kind of like the challenge was to fit Finland and Norway, which is having a lot of these narrow urban structures between the mountain areas to be fitted into the same concept as in Finland. This might be one stepping stone, what could be iterated in the next round. But anyway, we were pretty happy with the outcome from this phase. And how did we do this in the end? You can see that there's the scatter plot of population and number of buildings in different 1 kilometer grids. So we made a AI classifier which was using this random forest algorithm to classify all these 1 kilometer grids in the end to kind of like into two groups. That if the grid is part of the urban settlements or if they are not. And the classification was basically based on the density of amount of people and amount of buildings within each of the grid cell. Then the next step was basically starting to form these urban regions or greater urban areas, which are highlighted with the black border line in these pictures. Basically, we were trying to find these urban settlements, connected urban settlements having population with 15,000 or more inhabitants. And then these smaller settlements with fewer inhabitants located near the central urban settlements could be basically then either the neighboring urban settlements, or in the next step they could be also addressed as a local centers in rural areas. This is how we generated the urban area classes. So basically the inner urban and outer urban areas were defined based on the population density and building floor space. And we used this GIS analysis method called focal analysis in investigating each of the grid cell and its surrounding cells, and making these kind of different kind of calculations to output the result that corresponded to Finnish version made by Syke. And we get into the kind of like the limit numbers from the Finnish typology, setting up the floor area ratio to inner urban areas to 0.1, and then the floor area ratio to outer urban areas, it was between the 0.02 to 0.1. And then the peri-urban areas are surrounding the core urban areas, which were kind of like the inner urban plus outer urban areas. The peri-urban areas were calculated or formed from the car travel time calculations. So it was this 6-minute travel times from the edges of core urban areas, and then 4.5-minute travel time from the edges of neighboring urban settlements. Then the rural areas, we began identifying the local centers in rural areas. Those are the urban settlements in the rural areas that had population between 5,000 to 15,000 people. And then we continued using this another AI classifier of kind of like estimating if the land in Finland is either rural heartland area or sparsely populated rural area, and it was this was done based on the statistics of population, buildings, and current land use, and then the whole Finland in the first step, but all the other countries also were then divided into two groups, whether they are the rural heartland areas or the sparsely populated areas. And then the last typology class to be identified was rural close to urban, which was then basically these are the areas where with the rural characters that are functionally connected to close to urban areas, and these area sizes depends on the distribution of the urban area and on the connectiveness between two or more urban areas. And these areas that form this typology class are characterized by average driving time of 20 to 30 minutes from the edges of outer urban areas. Then for the final output, we basically just reordered all the layers, all the 7 different classes, beginning from the urban centers and then going step by step from urban center, inner urban to outer urban and peri-urban areas, and then continuing to set the layers in order for the rural classes, and then basically just clipping and dissolving the areas in this precise order. And then this is the picture of the original typology in the Finland and the new typology. The original one is on the right-hand side, and the newly made new typology made is in the middle of the screen now. And you can see that there are some differences between the typologies, but anyway, in a general picture, they are quite close to each other. And how we could basically get the result better from here is to get better data, basically. I think I have already used my time for the presentation, but what to be said one more thing is that we had to make also small compromises during the process, because the Finnish typology from the first version of the Finnish typology did not fit perfectly for the Nordic context. For instance, from the first output of the rural close to urban area, basically almost all the areas in Denmark were just classified as all the rural areas in Denmark was basically just classified as rural close to urban. So we had to kind of like make some kind of like iterations to the calculation to be able to fit the Finnish typology to the Nordic context. This is the output, but I think it's better that Mats will continue from here. Thanks. Any questions?
Thanks a lot, Jouko. That was really interesting to see. Seems like a very long process to get this typology constructed. So if you have any questions, please write them in the chat and we will bring them up. Now I think we will have one question on our Zoom poll. So we would like to know what part of the tool will be most valuable to you. I think you will now see this little screen popping up. So please answer and we will get to know what you think about the tool. While you do that, I think I will ask Jouko one question. It seemed like a very complicated process, but what did you think was the most difficult part of constructing this Nordic typology?
Well, based on the time we had to spend on the different typology classes, the hardest part for the typology was the rural areas close to urban, because it is mostly based on the human interactions and about the kind of like working areas and how do people kind of like interact in the rural areas and in the between the rural and urban areas. And that data in the original typology is data about these interactions and movements with the different groups of people, and that kind of data we didn't have at all. So then we had to kind of like find a way how to overcome this challenge, and it was taking a lot of time. So, and I would say if I would estimate the accuracy or the output from this Nordic typology, I would say that maybe that class would be the one that would have the most to include most of the improvements in the next round.
Yeah, maybe we will be able to update it in the future. Let's have a look at what you answered in the poll. What part of the tool will be most valuable to you? And I think most of you think that the 7 classes is the most interesting part and valuable part of the tool, and also the possibility of adding additional data sets to the typology. So that's very interesting for us to know. Then I think we will now continue because we know how you constructed this typology and how it works. So now we will focus on the next step. How can you use it? So as researchers, planners, or policymakers, what is it good for? And what does the typology tell us about the demographic development across the Nordic region? I will now hand over to our senior research fellow Mats Stjernberg, who will present our new report and the possibilities the new typology offers. The floor is yours, Mats.
Thank you, Sophia. Welcome also on my behalf. My name is Mats Stjernberg. I'm a senior research fellow here at Nordregio, the main author of the report, which is published today, where we have used this typology that Jouko just presented for analysis. And in our report, we also present, so everything that Jouko just explained, you can also read about that in the report, which is published today. So we will now share my slides. So basically what I wanted to share with you today is basically the report that we published today. I thought that we already heard a lot about the background and about especially the technical aspects of how this typology was constructed. I will also give a bit of other more general context behind why we even initiated this process. And then after that, I will go into the report and present how we have used the typology to examine territorial differences across the Nordics, also looking at settlement patterns and population change over time. So The typology, we heard this in the introduction already, that this is part of a cross-thematic group project, which means that this is a project funded by the 3 Nordic thematic groups that we see here. This was actually an initiative that was part of the work about remote work and the effects of increased remote work and that what implications that may have. This was, of course, started in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, when there was a lot of discussion about remote work, multi-locality. So one question was really, how could we better understand the territorial effects of remote work and multi-locality? You could say that the typology, of course, is not limited to the question of the effects of remote work or multi-locality. Rather, in the broader sense, you could say that this is the ambition was to create a tool that we could use for analysis. You could say that if we think about the Nordic region as it is, we can say that there are noticeable territorial differences between different types of regions and municipalities. And this is actually quite well studied. There have been many studies, a lot of research reports, for example, from Nordregio, where the focus has been on addressing these territorial differences, looking at regions and municipalities. But we know much less about territorial differences and trends within regions and municipalities. And one of the reasons for this is that there is a lack of easily available harmonized data that could be used for such analysis. So you could say that this was really what kickstarted this project, and then to go forward with creating this typology that Jouko just presented. So the typology is constructed at grid level, and the idea was to create something that would allow us to disentangle these characteristics of different types of areas, not just looking at the administrative boundaries of municipalities, for example, but to be able to do that at a more fine-grained spatial level, so to say. And also, the ambition was to create a typology to which different types of data could be combined and then to use for further analysis. As we heard, the main source of inspiration was this grid-based typology created by the Finnish Environment Institute, Syke. I will not say much more about that now, but just show here what we already saw from Jouko, that this was really the main source of inspiration, and also the Nordic typology has the same territorial classes as the Finnish typology. Another typology that I wanted to highlight here in this context is the degree of urbanization classification created by Eurostat, for the reason that this is the most known, the most established typology that is used for conducting different types of comparative analysis across countries. And this is a classification based on municipalities that are then grouped into three classes: urban municipalities, intermediate, and rural municipalities. And here we see an illustration of how the Nordic typology, which is grid-based and has 7 classes, looks like, as opposed to the 3-class municipality-based typology. I thought that I would just briefly highlight here sort of one of the reasons why we initiated this was, if we look at Nordic municipalities, especially in the northern parts of Finland and Sweden, they are very large in size. So if we categorize a municipality like Kiruna or Gällivare as being intermediate, then we can't really see what kind of territorial differences there are within these municipalities. So the report is out now. You could say that it has a twofold focus, presenting how the typology was constructed. I will not go into that now, as we already heard a very good detailed presentation about that from Jouko Järnefelt. But we also use the typology for analysis that I will now primarily focus on here in my presentation. So looking at territorial patterns, settlement patterns across the Nordic countries, looking at population changes, what they look like in the different typology classes. And then I thought that I would also illustrate some examples of what kind of internal differences we can see within Nordic municipalities when we use this typology. Here we see a population density map of the Nordic countries. This is constructed at 1 kilometer grid level. We see here that the population is quite unevenly distributed. We see that the main population concentrations are in the southern parts of Finland, Norway, and Sweden. Usually the largest cities are along the coastal areas, along waterways, where the capital cities can be found, but also other major medium-sized towns. Of course, Denmark has a much higher population density, and then Iceland is characterized by a very sparse population, but on the other hand, very strong concentration of population in a few urban regions. What we see here is now using the Nordic typology, what the proportion of the population, in which classes the Nordic population lives. So the Nordic population, 45% of the population lives in what we have characterized as inner urban areas, and 15% approximately in outer urban areas. So in terms of where we live in the Nordics, the population is to a high extent urban, and also to a lesser extent suburban in peri-urban and rural close to urban areas as well. But then in terms of land area, there's a different picture, and we see that most of the Nordic territory is rural, and only 1.5% of the Nordic territory is inner urban. So of course, this is explained by the much higher population density in these urban clusters. So we live very concentrated in urban regions, we can say. Then I thought that I would briefly show a few examples of what population changes look like over time. We looked at a period between 2008 and 2022. On the map that we see here, we see absolute population change at the grid level. We also see here that I just mentioned that the population is largely concentrated in the large cities and medium-sized towns. But we also see that the main population growth during the past approximately 2 decades has occurred in these urban regions. And then population decrease by contrast, which you can see in the darker brownish grid cells, is much more spread out. So population decrease is much more dispersed over larger areas. And especially we see that in Finland and in Denmark, there are many such areas where the population is decreasing. Then when examining these questions from the perspective of the Nordic urban rural typology, over time, the population grew from approximately 25 to nearly 28 million between these 2 years, 2008 and 2022. And this is a trend that was evident in all the Nordic countries. Then looking at the different typology classes, again, we see that this goes in line with the previous map where we saw that the main population increase can be seen in the most densely populated urban regions. We also see that inner urban areas have seen the most significant population growth during this period of time. And then the second most, or the second category where growth has been the most prominent has been in outer urban regions and peri-urban regions. So there is indeed a tendency of urbanization and also accompanied with that suburbanization where outer urban regions and peri-urban regions are growing. Then, of course, I think the standard view is that rural areas are shrinking, and this is often how it is perceived. But we see here that there are actually noticeable differences between the different classes, and in fact, those rural areas that are located relatively near urban areas and also the local centers in rural areas have actually seen a slight increase in population, but then this decrease of population is most noticeable then in the sparsely populated rural areas. This is just to show two maps that actually look quite similar. Here we see the population change, what it looked like between 2008 and 2017, and then during 2017 and 2022. And the big picture is relatively similar. So there has not been a radical shift in the patterns between these two periods of time. But then there are more noticeable differences that we can observe when we have a closer look at certain regions and municipalities. I thought that we could use the cross-border region of Öresund as an example here, where we do see that there has been a kind of shift here where 2008, 2017 was characterized by very noticeable increase in the inner and outer urban areas, but then the second period of time, 2018 to 2022, many of those areas that had previously seen an increase in population actually saw their population decrease or stagnate to some extent, and then population growth occurred outside of these inner and outer urban areas. So this is just one example of how we use the Nordic urban rural typology to examine what kind of population changes we can see. And then, of course, one of the starting points was to get a better understanding of differences within Nordic municipalities. So in the report, we also look at how this Nordic typology, how that can be used as a complement to the highly established Eurostat municipality-based degree of urbanization classification. We see, again, this is a map that we saw earlier, but here I wanted to illustrate that I thought that we could take a closer look at the urban municipalities. So those municipalities that are classified as urban according to the Eurostat typology, there are 61 of those in the Nordic countries combined. And I thought that we could have a closer look at one of these. Here we see a graph. In the report, you will find an interactive graph that you can examine. You can hover over the graph and then you can see which municipality that is. So here in the graph, each dot is an urban municipality. And on the y-axis, we see the share of the population in that municipality that lives in the urban classes of the Nordic typology. And on the x-axis, we see the share of the land area that is categorized as part of the urban typology classes. An interesting example that I thought that we could use a couple of minutes to examine is the city of Kuopio in eastern Finland, which is an urban municipality according to the Gerba, so the Eurostat typology. But then according to the Nordic typology, only approximately 3% of the land area belongs to urban areas. But then on the other hand, 76% of the population lives in the urban classes. So in terms of where the population lives, it's highly urban, but then in terms of what kind of territories there are within the municipality, the overwhelming part are actually rural areas. So Kuopio, we see a zoomed in map of the municipality. It's a municipality that's very vast in size, including different types of urban and rural areas. Of course, the municipality, this is an example of a municipality that has grown in past decades as a result of several mergers of different municipalities. And these municipalities have generally had sparse populations with few residents. So when they have been combined with the municipality of Kuopio, the result is a very large municipality with a lot of sparse areas, but where the population lives quite concentrated. So nonetheless, this municipality reveals that this municipality, for example, consists of quite different types of areas that we cannot really observe if we would only classify the municipality as being either urban, intermediate, or rural. So I wanted to round up with just saying a few end points here. So the purpose, as I mentioned earlier, was really to provide a new analytical framework. So this is a tool for research and analysis primarily, but of course, I do believe that this could be useful as well in supporting planning and policy development. But the main purpose is actually for this to be an analytical tool. And the idea was to have something that would allow us to grasp these types of internal differences within administrative areas that cannot be observed with more general classifications or statistics. And we do see that many municipalities are at the same time both urban, intermediate, and rural. So the municipalities are undergoing different types of population change dynamics at the same time. And then as a final point here, I just presented some examples of analysis where we have examined population change and settlement patterns in the Nordics. But of course, this is a typology that could be used also for other types of purposes and studying other types of spatial phenomena as well. Here you have a link to the report that you can access, has been published today, and also a link to the interactive version of the Nordic urban rural typology. And you can also zoom in on different territories in the online map tool and also download the GIS files of the typology to use for further analysis. Okay, I thank you, and we'll be happy to answer any questions if there are.
Thanks a lot, Mats. That was really interesting, and I hope someone from Kuopio was participating and can get some new insights on this. I think we will now take actually just one short question. I saw in the chat that people were wondering why Greenland and the Faroe Islands are not included. Maybe you can just give a short comment on that.
Yeah, it's a very simple explanation. No data was available for Greenland and the Faroe Islands. Of course, in the initial phases, that was the ambition to have something pan-Nordic encompassing the whole Nordic region, but unfortunately, we did not come across data for Greenland and the Faroe Islands that could be used for this purpose. But hopefully in the future, that would also be a possibility.
Yes. Good to know. And then I think we will take a Zoom poll. We would like to know what you will use the typology for. Here you have some options, or you can type in your own answer. But while you do that, maybe I will ask Anna what is going on in the chat. We have some questions there. What would you like to bring up?
Thank you. I think it was a few questions regarding pretty much the same idea. So I think, Mats, it's more to you. If you can explain, it's a great idea to have them methodologically based on the local conditions, but there is a concern that we use comparability with other countries. So in our exercise, we took the Nordic countries, and people are wondering, do we have an ambition to extend it to other countries, and especially to the Baltic states, for example?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Actually, we have a parallel project where Nordregio is involved called Granular. It's a European Horizon project, and there the name of the project is Granular, and it's about grasping rural diversity. So there, in that project, the ambition is to create a European-wide rural typology. So that's something that is now in the works. It's a 4-year project with approximately 2 years left. So Yes, but hopefully, as long as there is available data, then it could also be considered. I mean, the option of upscaling the Nordic typology to the Baltics would also be a very interesting exercise as well. So, of course, we are open to different possibilities and different initiatives, and that would be great to further extend the work.
And now let's have a look at the poll answers here. What will you use the typology for? Most answered research and analysis and spatial planning and then policy development. I was wondering, Mats, here you use the typology for analyzing settlement patterns and population change. But what other possibilities do you see that you could use this typology for?
Yes, I would say that there are, and I would not say endless, that's promising too much, but there are numerous possibilities. One very concrete initiative or something that we have going on is we will use the Nordic typology in connection to the analysis of internal migration in the coming state of the Nordic region. So it will briefly be used there. But overall, of course, we hope that this could be used in different types of projects. One possibility, for example, could be to Nordregio developed in collaboration with Ubigu another similar type of tool called the Nordic Service Mapper a few years back. And this is a map where we can examine disparities in access to services. And there in that typology or that tool, we actually use the European degree of urbanization classification, so urban, intermediate, and rural as defined by municipalities. But of course, there would be possibilities of incorporating this grid-based 7-class typology with that as well. So that's one concrete example that would be possible to do.
And when we speak about the possibilities and the future, Jouko, what do you think would be some improvements that could be considered for this model in terms of the technical aspects and how you could develop it to become even better?
Good question, thanks. Well, I think I said few minor additions or improvements we could make during my presentation, but what is something that needs to be taken care in the next version is the connectivity or interactivity between the cities in the country borders. We realize that basically, for example, Tornio and Haaparanta in Finnish and Swedish borderline are a twin city connected to each other. The typology at the moment is not doing a great work there at the moment. We should improve that one.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see if we get more funding to do that, I guess. Mm-hmm. Maybe we will again ask Anna what is happening in the chat. Is some other questions that you would like to highlight?
There is an interesting discussion, I guess, that we've also been working in our project. Can you, Mats, explain more? Because we use the grid data, and as we know, the European classification also use grid data that later been aggregated to the municipality or the law layer. And people are wondering that's just using the grid data, we lose the opportunity to work with the data that collected on the higher level, let's say municipalities, so law of European Union. How can we go around this given our typology?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and also something that was not evident in my presentation, actually, because that was just a snapshot of some of the analysis that we have conducted. But in our report, we have also scaled up the grid-based typology to the municipality level. So it's done in two ways, either based on which population class is the predominant one. So in which Nordic typology class do most of the people in that municipality live, but we also tried with upscaling it based on the land area and sort of territorial coverage. But I would say that flexibility is one of the advantages of this typology. It can be scaled up. So now it's been constructed at the 1 kilometer grid level, but it can be scaled up to the municipality level with no problem. And of course, it is also true that much more data is available at the municipality level, and sometimes the grid level data is quite costly. So this flexibility is actually a good thing worth highlighting, and it's also something that the Nordic typology can be scaled up to the municipality level, for example.
Time is running, but I think we have time for one short question and one short answer, if that is possible. Maybe Anna, do you have some final question that would be interesting to discuss before we wrap up?
There is an interesting question. I'm not sure it's short, but I think Mats can answer it pretty short. How do we compare the changes in urbanization rate in the Nordic countries during 2008-22 based on the typology?
So for this analysis, unfortunately, I showed you that we look at 2 periods of time, and the reason for this is that we have population data from 3 years: 2008, 2017, and 2022. It would be optimal to have annual data, because then we could observe on a yearly level what kind of changes are occurring. But in brief, we have only been able to, since this grid data is actually very expensive in many cases. So for this analysis, we only had these 3 years, but we compared what absolute change and what the relative change looked like during these 2 periods of time.
Yes, I think we still have many questions. That's very nice that you're so engaged, but I think we have to wrap up now. I think this has been very interesting and enlightening, and thanks a lot, Jouko and Mats, for your presentations. We will be sending the link to the webinar if you want to rewatch it or disseminate it to your colleagues. You can do that, and of course also the link to the report. And now we also have a very short feedback poll that we would like you to answer. We would love to get better at what we're doing, so please fill that in. A big thank you to everyone for being a part of this conversation, and let's carry on this spirit and continue exploring our Nordic municipalities. As we learned today, they are quite interesting to analyze, and there's a lot to talk about. But thanks a lot again, and until next time, have a nice week.